ended up doing more damage than it did good. So he wrote a book about it called Selling Sanity. Test. Okay. Selling Sanity. Um, and we're just waiting for him to come on. So yeah, the podcast has been going good. We've been having more guests. Um, there's two more guests on Monday. Um, Gloria Bettini and Noah May. Excuse me, because I'm a little bit under the weather. So let me make sure.
Hey, Wanda. I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you doing? I love the background.
Thank you.
Let
Wait,
me
okay.
apologies. It's a little toasty here in Southern California at the moment, so I'm
Oh, I bet.
how
How's some of that?
where in the country are you?
Upper Michigan, Canada, Mexico.
Oh, so you're right on the border.
Yes.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me and chat.
I'm happy to hear your story. Before we get started, my therapist suggests that I do this because I have really bad stomach.
Okay.
What is your favorite color? What is your favorite food?
Ooh, my favorite food is pizza, and my favorite color is black.
Oh,
I know
sure.
that sounds very strange, but if you were to look in my wardrobe, it's like 50 shades of black all up in my wardrobe. So,
Mine too.
and how about you? What are your favorite colors and pizza? And what's your favorite pizza?
My favorite color is green, and then my favorite food is probably tacos or anything bison.
Ooh, bison.
Yeah, I've switched to bison rather than beef lately, and therefore it's
You like it?
yeah, it's very good.
Ooh, I'll have to check it out. I do love a bison burger every once in a while. They have a few places in LA where you can get some really tasty bison burgers. So,
I bet.
yeah.
All right, well, please share your story. We're pretty lax here, so hopefully I'll say it goes.
Very cool. So I'm Corey Gentry. I just recently wrote a book called Selling Sanity, the Troubled Teen Industry, the Insane Profits, and the Kids Who Pay the Price. And that book really is kind of a memoir of mine, of my story going into treatment. So I grew up in rural Georgia, just outside of a small city, Augusta, Georgia, in an even smaller city called Grovetown, Georgia. And I grew up in this. We were no PC way of saying it. We were trailer trash. We were just these poor rural white kids. Lived in a trailer park in outside of Grovetown, Georgia. And when I was, growing up, you go through all the stuff that you go through when you grow up in a disenfranchised rural poverty area. Lots of bullying, lots of abuse, lots of neglect, going hungry, that kind of stuff, and just growing up poor. And then when I was a teenager, I started. A lot of this was socioeconomic. Just kind of started falling into different crowds of people, and there wasn't really anything to do but drugs. And I started out just smoking cannabis and doing the things that all 14, 15-year-old teenage boys do. What was a little different for me was a friend of mine at the time had ended up in a treatment center, and he was kind of our. I think everybody has friend groups that are like this, but he was sort of he was like the group screw up. You know what I mean? He was the guy that got in trouble every time. If something happened, his name was Kenneth, and if anything was going to happen, it was going to happen to Kenneth. And Kenneth got sent off to this treatment center. And he came. He was away for a few days, and then he came back, and he seemed, he was skipping around and happy. And we were like, "What's going on?" And he said, "Oh, I found this treatment center. The girls are really hot." And he just kind of went off with all the stuff that a 15-year-old boy might say. So I was like, "Oh, I'll check it out." So we went to one of these support group meetings together, and and immediately they hooked me. These very attractive counselors. I was 15 from a trailer park in Grovetown, Georgia, and these like 20, 21 years old, I think at the time, counselors. They were just, gorgeous, walking around spinning these monkey fists that they had, and they came up and they immediately hugged me and told me that they loved me, and they were like, "Hey, how's it going?" And for somebody like me, it was like, what the hell is going on here? Most of these people in the neighborhood that I was in, and the part of town that I was in, I was like, these people would have nothing to do with somebody like me most of the time. But they were coming up to me and hugging me, and all of the kids in the cohort, there were about 25 or 30 young people in that group, and they were all from these really well-to-do upper middle class families. It was in a very affluent part of Augusta, Georgia. And I just remember seeing things that I'd never seen before. And all of the young girls who were very attractive, Kenneth was right, were coming up to me and giving me hugs. And they were like, "Oh, we want you to come and ride with me tonight," because they all drove and stuff and had these really nice cars and all this nice stuff. And the counselors came and talked to me, and they were like, "Hey, have they called it a purpose meeting with me." So we sat down on a curb and they started feeding me cigarettes and stuff like that. And I was like, "Oh my God, I can smoke and I can do this." And my family was also very fundamentalist Christian. So it was just kind of a byproduct of growing up where I did. They were very involved in the Pentecostal church. So I was very familiar with the hellfire and brimstone of the Old Testament. And, these people didn't seem to have anything to do with any of that. It was very secular, although it did have a ton of like pseudo-religious undertones. But they sat me down and they just started asking me to tell my story, what was going on, what brought me here. And I told them about Kenneth, and then they just started asking questions, and they were like, "Oh, I love doing these drugs, and I used to love," and I was like, "Oh my God, I like doing those drugs too." And we just kind of talked, and at that point, I really had a very mild experience with substances. At that point, I had drank a handful of times. I had smoked weed maybe a dozen or a dozen and a half times, and but I sat and I blurted out all kinds of nonsense to him too. I lied. It's a nice way of saying it, because I wanted him to like me. I was like, "Oh my God, these people are great," and the last thing I wanted to do was to say something that I thought would put me on the outs with these folks. And so we sat there and smoked and just hung out and laughed and traded stories back and forth. And then at the end of the conversation, they were like, "Man, you're a drug addict and an alcoholic." And I was like, "What?" And they were like, "Yeah, do you ever feel sad, or do you ever feel," they kind of went off with these kind of very general things that I don't know a teenager that doesn't feel these types of things. And I just identified with all of it. And they were like, "Man, you're an alcoholic and a drug addict." And I hope you don't mind if I swear, but they were like, "You're so fucked up that you don't even know you're fucked up." And I was like, "Okay, that sure." Like, yeah, that makes sense. And coming from the family that I had come from, and a lot of the experience I had, my mother was mentally ill and abusive, and I had relatives that had killed themselves and stuff like that. So it was very easy to connect the dots, and we were very poor. So, and I told them all of this, and they kind of drew the link between, they were like, "Yeah, that's why you're an alcoholic and a drug addict." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So then they were like, "Well, you need to come to treatment with us, and it's like $8,000. And this was in 1997. So I was like, "Well, there's no way my parents are going to be able to, pay for that." So they called my parents and told my parents God knows what, but my parents immediately freaked out and were like, "Oh my God." And through a series of a bunch of different events, I think a very wealthy Jewish family in Atlanta ended up paying for my treatment. Because one of their kids was in the group. But I ended up staying there for 5 years. And when I was in that, from about 15 to 20, and when I was in that group, it was, you could only hang out with people in that group, you could only date people in that group. They immediately took me out of school because I needed to focus on my recovery. And my parents, they basically told my parents, like, "Look, he's going to die if you don't do something." So my parents, they were very troubled, but they didn't want to see their kid die. So they just kind of did it, whatever the counselors told them to. And these counselors they weren't even counselors. They weren't therapists. They had some like weird, obscure certification. that allowed them to operate in the state of Georgia at that time. And I was there for 5.5 years. And during that time, I ran into a lot of problems. I was already a very troubled kid to begin with, and I had inherited probably a lot of mental health issues from my family and family members and stuff. And none of that was being addressed in the program. They were just like, hang out with us, have fun, get out of your head. Most of it was just sharing every thought kind of repetitively that you had with them, and then acting as insane as you possibly could to, quotation marks, have a good time, because their model was based on enthusiastic sobriety. So it was myself and about, like I said, 25, 30 other kids that were there. And that was it. That's all we hung out with. We lived together, we worked together. We weren't allowed to have friends outside of the group, to date outside of the group, to go to schools outside of the group, like none of that stuff. So it was just 24/7 these people. And year after year, I just kept getting worse and worse. And I was deteriorating mentally. Things at home were getting really bad. My family's socioeconomic status didn't change at all. My mother kept getting worse and worse. I had a half brother who was very homicidal at the time. Relatives were dying. I had close friends of mine that were dying during the time, and it was just really tragic. And the more that I would talk to these counselors in there about, I was like, hey, I'm really struggling. I don't know what's going on. And I would talk to them about the abuse and a lot of just really tragic things that happened to me. And I heard other people talk about like girls talking about being molested, being raped, sexually assaulted, guys talking about sexually assaulting women, raping. I mean, discussions that should not be happening in a co-ed environment. And they would say things like, I distinctly remember in one session where a girl was just young girl was pouring her heart out. She couldn't have been more than like 12 or 13 years old, about some really terrible things that had happened to her sexually as a child, and it really mirrored some of the things that happened to me, not sexually, but from an abuse standpoint, that happened to me as a child. And their response to her and to me were the same. They were like, you chose that. This is your shit, and you need to own it so that you can be accountable for it and move on. And at the time, even though I think I was like maybe 16 or 17 at the time, I remember thinking, I don't know much about anything, but that doesn't sound right to me, And then I spoke to him a few times about therapy and psychiatry, because I was really deteriorating. I had anger stuff that was just uncontainable. I had behavioral problems. I had some learning deficiencies and stuff like that were very apparent. I couldn't hold down jobs or anything like that, but for the group, they just didn't care. It was just like, hang out with us 24/7. So I would just try harder and then fail worse, and then they would get angrier and angrier. And it just sort of cyclicated this cycle for a long time. And then after that, one day they were like, hey, you're going to graduate. And I apologize. I have a dog who always finds toys to play with when I'm in the background. But one day they were like, hey, you're going to graduate. And during that time, they never wanted us to have any contact with anybody outside of the program. The group is what they called it. Then all of a sudden they were like, hey, you're going to graduate, and you need to start going to AA meetings. And we were all kind of like, what are you talking about? So after about a month, they just booted us out, and they were like, all right, good luck. You have, and they said, you have everything that you need in order to have a life beyond your wildest dreams. At that time, I was 20 years old. I had no job skills, no marketable skills, no education at all, the education of a 14-year-old. I had no friends outside of the group, and from the time that we left, immediately people started committing suicide and starting to drink and use again. So we were really just set up to fail. And then I was kind of dumped into the AA community in Augusta, Georgia, which is very similar to the fundamentalist Christian community in Augusta, Georgia. And they just didn't know what to do with somebody like me. They were like, "Who the hell is this kid?" And they all, even the folks in AA, which AA is a pretty like, it's a great organization, but they had some real kooky folks there. Even some of the kooky folks in AA were like, "Yo, this kid is like, something is going on with this kid. Like, you're not right." And there was a group of about 3 or 4 of us that came out of the group at that time, and all of the counselors and everybody at the time were like, "Whoa, these kids are creepy." Because we talked like we came out of a cult. It was like, "Yeah, I'm just really grateful to be here, and we just gotta all stick together in this." And they were like, "Yo, what Kool-Aid did you drink?" And so and then they were talking about God and all this stuff, and the program that I was in, it was all sort of centered around this big figurehead. His name was Bob Meehan, and then his little acolyte was this guy named Clint Stonebreaker. And whatever Bob said was the word of God. And Bob was this like former heroin addict with no experience whatsoever. He just started, he thought, he's a very charismatic guy, and he was like, "You know what, I'm going to start a treatment center." And, props to him, he did it. And he made a lot of money off of it, like a lot of money off of it. And so I got out of AA, or I got out of treatment and was in AA, and I just started to deteriorate. I don't know a better way to say it. And I probably should have ended up in like a mental ward or something like that for a little while, but I was very, very fortunate that a few, I call them angels, just sort of stepped in and kind of helped me out. And they were like, "Yo, kid, you got problems, my friend." And alcoholism and drug addiction is hardly one of them. They did just very basic things, like they helped me get a therapist, which took me years to even acquiesce to, because they were very anti-medication, anti-therapy, anti-anything. It was a real kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and fix your own thinking mentality. And I really struggled with that. And so after years, I don't know how, but I didn't kill myself, which was something that I really wanted to do and thought about for days or for months and months after I got out. But for whatever reason, I didn't, and I just kind of kept persevering. And then somebody told me that I should go to school because that I had like a certain chutzpah about me when it came to knowledge and all of that. And they were like, "You should apply that to education." And I did, and that was very difficult because I had a 9th grade education at that point. So I had to do a bunch of really hard remedial stuff to get into college, to get into a community college, and then from community college I went on to regular uni, and then I decided to move to Europe. So in 2006, I moved to Dublin, Ireland, and finished and then stayed in Europe for about 12 years, and did all my education over there. I did finished my bachelor's, did a master's, did another master's, and then did my Ph.D. And while I was doing my Ph.D. and my several master's degrees, my research and my academic pursuits, I got really interested in cults and radicalization. Go figure. So I was like, "Oh, how do people become radicalized?" And I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation and one of my master's dissertations on adolescent radicalization in conflict zones. So I looked at how I studied how kids become radicalized and ultimately turn into terrorists in conflict zones in places like Northern Ireland or South Africa during apartheid, or Israel is another hot spot, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and Iraq, places like that. And I had the good fortune to go to those locations and interview people and study radicals and radicalization. So I learned a lot academically from that, and there was also like a personal pursuit with that. And in 2017, I finished my PhD and all of that, and I decided to come back to the United States and move to Los Angeles because I was offered a job by a company out here. And at that time, I was still pretty involved in the AA world or in the recovery community. I had been sober for, like 20 years at that point or something, and had built a life for myself, was really just kind of going along. But the group and my experience in treatment was just I want to say it was one of those things that as soon as I got out, in the first year and a half or 2 years was just miserable. I wanted to die every day. I just thought I was deteriorating. It was really, really bad. And so when I finally got through the initial just trauma of coming out of that place, I was like, I don't want to fucking deal with this ever again. So I just thought, like, well, I'm going to bookmark this as like a really shitty section of my life story, and like we just shan't revisit this again. But about 20 something years in, I was having a lot of just recurring problems with relationships and friendships and jobs, and I couldn't understand why I just kept kind of blowing things up in my life, and why there were these like major roadblocks that I kept running into. And I came across this fantastic woman named Tara Holbrook and Judy Crane, who are these like the trauma specialists, I would say, in the United States. And Tara and her husband were very kind, and I ended up going to a men's trauma retreat with her for like a week and a half a couple of years ago, with me and a group of men that I attended that with. And in the process of doing that, I really, I don't know why, but I started focusing in on my time in treatment, and that just really opened me up to a whole new world, and inspired me to write my book and to start getting in contact and utilizing my academic skills and prowess to really tell the story of myself and a lot of the other people that were there during that time. And also during that time, I had started actually working in treatment. So I kind of went full circle, because when you're in the group at the time, the big thing is to be a counselor in the group. It's like the highest honor that you can get is for Bob to ask you to become a counselor in the group. It means that you're like the optimal human. And he would call them like the equivalent of like a Jedi master, is what he used to talk about it as. So we all wanted it. So you can imagine how heartbreaking it is to not be chosen and then get kicked out. So after that, I was like, to hell with treatment. I'm never going to do it. And I knew that the counselors were broke all the time. And I was like, I've done broke, and I don't want to do broke anymore. So if I'm going to do something, it's going to be something that pays very well. So when I moved to LA, I would go to, recovery meetings and do stuff like that. And I came across all of these people in the Los Angeles recovery community, and they all worked in treatment, and they were all driving around in these like ridiculous cars. And at the time, I worked for a luxury automotive dealer. I moved to Southern California because I was offered a job by Rolls-Royce Motor Company. So I was in like the luxury kind of automotive world. So I would go to these meetings, and I would see guys come in like Bentleys and Range Rovers, and these very expensive cars. And I was like, what the hell do you guys do? And they were like, oh, we run a treatment program, or we do this, or it seemed like every other person was in treatment. And I was like, wow, so you can make money in like the rehab world and stuff. And by this time, Obamacare had happened, so insurance was covering treatment, and I came in and just got opened up to this treatment industrial complex, is really what I call it. And I kind of got to experience the recovery world from a completely different angle. I saw the business side of things, and initially I got in and I really thrived, because I went to very good schools. I have a pretty entrepreneurial mindset, so and I had quite the Rolodex because of the academic institutions that I went to and some of the jobs that I had had previously. I knew a lot of very high net worth people and doctors, and I was am a very educated person, so you kind of rub shoulders with similar individuals, and they loved that. They loved that I had this pedigree and this kind of story and all that. So I quickly started rising in the treatment world, and in the process of that, I really started seeing a lot of stuff that I would reflect back on and be like, oh, they would do that when I was in this insight program. And there were just these little red flags that would kind of pop up in the back of my head here and there, where I was like, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of, you're like, I know this is familiar, and something about this just isn't right. And I kind of kept going, and a lot of it was like just the money. I was like, you guys, this is an insane amount of money. Like, people making millions of dollars a month off of these treatment centers. and it was just a churn. And there were these transitional living homes and all of this stuff, and all of it costs money. All of it costs a lot of money, and a lot of it is run through insurance. And they were kind of doing the same things where they were targeting like upper middle class families and opening programs in like affluent areas. They weren't opening programs in like East LA and Compton. They were opening them in like Beverly Hills and West Hollywood and all the affluent areas. And they would keep talking about access. They're like, oh, we're expanding access. And I was like, well, not really. I was like, if you want to expand access, why don't we open a program here, program there? And I started kind of learning more about like the macro and unit side economics of these treatment programs. So I got more and more curious, and I kept moving up the ladder because they just kept throwing money at me. So I was like, okay, sure. And then I started asking questions. And that was really when, a career that was kind of going like this quickly started going like this, because I started asking questions. And it was things like, why do we keep readmitting the same people over and over and over again? If they've been here 10 times, it's probably not working. So why are we readmitting these people? Or how come none of our admission staff are clinical? In fact, most of the admission staff don't even have a high school education. They're these like tattooed guys that are, it looks like something out of the Wolf of Wall Street. When anyone asks me like, what is a treatment center admissions room like, or a call center if you're calling in to ask for help, from the person calling in, it sounds very professional because they have scripts and they have all these things that they read through. But on the back end, it's like a scene out of Wolf of Wall Street when he's selling the penny stocks, and he gives this like really good speech, and everyone looks at him like, holy shit, you just invented fire. That's exactly what an admission sales team is like for any commercial private treatment center. Whether they take insurance or cash or whatever, that is exactly the process that you go through. So they have these call centers and stuff, and then they had marketing and business development people, which was something that I did, and the whole job is to just find people and get people to come into treatment. That is the whole game, and it's all about the numbers and how many you can close. And the more that you can close, which means that you get someone to commit to come into treatment, the more money you make, and that's the business model. So you can see there where it opens up for lots of potential problems and stuff. And as I progressed in the industry, I kept noticing more and more that programs were getting shut down because federal authorities were getting involved. I kept noticing lots of insurance fraud and stuff that was going on. And then I started getting my eye on some of the adolescent treatment programs. And I remember some of the guys that I saw from the treatment programs when I was a kid that had done really horrible things and had popped up on the news, and it wasn't like a conjecture that they were doing illegal things. It was like, no, they're doing shit that's illegal, but they were still in the industry. So I was kind of like, how in the hell is this happening? And the more that so then I kind of went from wanting to work in the industry to wanting to investigate the industry, really. And I made a conscious decision to stay in the industry, but to do it with a very different intention. And that intention was to really learn the ins and outs of it so that I could expose the ins and outs of it. And I worked for some major corporate treatment programs that are like private equity backed, and one of them I think now is worth over $1 billion or something. And then smaller kind of mom and pop organizations. And in the process of doing that, I decided to write my book, Selling Sanity, which you can now understand the title, because I really wanted to give a micro survivor experience, which is my own survivor experience, to speak to a larger macro problem. And I know that now there are a lot of kids and a lot of survivors, friends of mine that I went through treatment with, or people that I knew that went through treatment many years ago, that are speaking up and speaking out about the things that happened to them in programs like mine and therapeutic boarding schools and these wilderness programs, most of whom you're sent to by education consultants or these like marketing consultants, almost none of whom have any clinical training or anything. And you just step into these programs, and like me, they asked me nothing about my background. They didn't do any kind of like major psych testing on me. Nothing. And then they handed me a diagnosis that would stick with me for the rest of my life. They were like, you're a drug addict and an alcoholic. So, I wrote the story to try and, one, unpack my kind of personal journey in going through that, but two, to just tell a much larger story about the treatment industry as a whole, because I'm a huge believer in treatment, and I still work in treatment. I advise some programs and stuff. So in the book, what I really did was I tried to make a big distinction between the industry and the professionals in the industry. And I think that there are a lot of professionals in the behavioral health world that are excellent. They're good therapists, and some of them saved my life. And I recommend families and patients and all kinds of people to those individuals. But then there is a very real industrial side to this. And all they care about is it's a churn. It's a money-making scam. And in the treatment world, they talk about heads and beds. If you talk on any admissions call or anything, they're like, we need heads and beds. We need bodies in our treatment program so that we can bill insurance. And at the end of the day, that's what it all boils down to. Because most of these programs, 80% of them are staffed. They're not even staffed by therapists. They're staffed by associate therapists that are in the So imagine sending your kid to a doctor, and instead of the physician seeing him, the intern or the resident is like, yeah, I'm going to treat your kid. What would you say in a situation like that? No, yeah, you'd be like, hell no. I don't want the intern who's learning, experimenting on my child. I want the doctor to see my kid. But what a lot of these programs do is they'll hire they'll have a doctor as like a 1099 employee, which that doctor will also work for about 50 or 60 other treatment programs, and their job is to just basically sign and prescribe. Is really what it is. They sign off on hours and then they prescribe medication. If you're lucky, you may get like a 15-minute conversation once a week with the doctor, and then the rest of the time you're being looked after by associate therapists that are just out of school. Most of them are in their early 20s. Most of the schools that they've gone to aren't even real schools, in my opinion. There are a lot of these like online university mills, where you just pay to collect a degree after a certain period of time. And they're being supervised by therapists that have usually just gotten their clinical license, which means they've just met the criteria to be a licensed therapist. So they don't really know anything. These people aren't seasoned. Most of them are like in their early 20s. And a lot of the programs are even being designed by people that have no clinical training whatsoever. So people with no clinical training, no medical background, most of them don't even have like a 4-year college degree, are owning and operating and running these treatment centers. And they're the ones that are responsible for hiring and firing therapists, hiring and firing physicians, nurses, all of that. And they, most of them are owned, I would say about 80% of them are owned by people that are in recovery. So their kind of qualification is, well, I got sober, so, I get it. And I'm sorry, but me personally, I don't think that just, I was in recovery for over 25 years. You did not want me giving psychiatric advice. And I have 6 degrees, but still, you don't want me giving psychiatric advice to your kids. There's a reason that licensed doctors are licensed doctors, and that they're specialists in whatever field that they specialize in. That's very important in the field of medicine and academia and anything like that. But a lot of these programs, particularly adolescent programs, are operated in quite an anathema to that. So they're run by these, I call them phony experts. Is really a lot of them. They're like the equivalent of a TikTok mental health influencers or something like that. So in the process of seeing that, I started kind of calling balls and strikes on programs and being like, hey, this is wrong, or you shouldn't be doing that, or aren't you concerned about the pricing structure, for instance? Like I can remember working at one place and they wanted to charge, they did charge a family like $70,000 a month for treatment. Oh yeah, and that's like cheap treatment. I know programs, there's a few places out in Texas and out here in California where it's like, $175,000, $275,000 a month, and they keep people in treatment for like 6-7 months at a time at $275,000 a month. So families are like, at the time, families were remortgaging their homes to put their kids into treatment or to put their loved ones into treatment. And after a few years of this, I was like, this is excuse me for saying it this way, but this is fucking wrong. I was like, this is exploitative, let alone damaging. So I started raising questions to people, and I noticed the more questions I raised, the less callbacks I got, and the less work that people started wanting to do with me. So I decided to write my book, Selling Sanity, and that was about a year ago that I decided to write the book, and then about 3 months ago I was in the finishing phases of it and started letting people know, and then about a month and a half ago I finally launched the book, and yeah, I've been doing that ever since. So now I still work in the treatment program, treatment world, though not nearly as much as I used to. Now I spend a lot of time consulting for medical practices. Me and a group of individuals are starting a nonprofit to kind of a watchdog organization to start rating and treatment centers in very equivalent a way that we do with like the Better Business Bureau or the public health organizations rate restaurants. With Compass, the organization that we're wanting to get off the ground and going on the nonprofit and regulatory side is really just operating on the basic assumption of, we rate restaurants, we rate hospitals, we rate schools on the quality of education, everything that they're putting out. Why would we not do the same to places that are taking care of and looking after some of the most vulnerable individuals in our population, mentally ill and troubled teenagers? Personally, I would like to see it for all behavioral health organizations, but at Compass we're starting off small and wanting to start with at least adolescent behavioral health programs, because I believe that if you can make changes at that level, because there are programs that are doing really good work that are really helping kids develop and do things, but then there are many other programs that aren't doing that, and I would say they're doing the exact opposite of that. They're not helping kids, they're actually hurting kids and doing a lot of damage to them, because I think good therapy, good treatment, good psychiatry, good anything, it's just like education. It doesn't teach you how to think, it teaches you how to think about things. It doesn't teach you what to think, it teaches you how to think about things. And I think that's what good therapy and psychiatry did for me. It didn't, before, they're really big into teaching you what to think. And if you go to a lot of these behavioral modification programs or this or that, it's really it's our way or the highway kind of model. And it's like, this is how it is. And it really mirrors the AA community, which there's no it's great, but there's no like scientific basis in Alcoholics Anonymous or any of the 12-step programs. It's a fine philosophy to live by, but there's no hard scientific data that proves that it does or doesn't work. In fact, any of the data that's available shows that it doesn't work well at all. Actually, it's something like 1 out of 60 people get clean and stay clean, and that type of program. So it's really just bringing a lot of honesty, or a lot more honesty, I think, to the recovery program, and really forcing treatment centers to really develop legitimate outcome measures, because a lot of people, most of what you see now is like, it's marketing fluff. They give you these outcome studies and they're like, 75% of the people that come with us get better. And it's like, really? Do they really? So you start digging into the data a little bit, and it's like, this doesn't count, and this doesn't count, and this doesn't count. And then once you start getting into it, that 75% starts looking a lot more like a 15%, or maybe a 10%, or a 5% success rate. And from my perspective, and the perspective of Compass, and where I'm coming from with Selling Sanity, is I really feel, and my mission is to hold the behavioral health community to the same standards as we do the regular medical community. If you went to a heart surgeon and he had a 5% success rate in open heart surgery, you probably wouldn't go see that heart surgeon. I wouldn't. But these treatment programs that are operating at full capacity 24/7, and they're all about bill baby bill and grow baby grow. Most of these places are operating at best at like a 15 to 20% success rate at optimal. So I think we should do better. And I think the first step in doing better is having very honest conversations and real discussions about what is actually happening in the program, because everybody believes in mental health and everybody wants to help people that have behavioral health disorders. I've not met anyone that's even that Fox News host that said maybe they should go for I think some Fox News host said something about people, maybe they should get like voluntary lethal injections or something like that. Aside from him, he's the only person that I've ever heard of wanting to like actively harm individuals that have severe mental health disorders. So there is an intention to help, but a lot of these best intentions are really falling short of being actualized. So my goal and my kind of story through being someone that went through it is really wanting to be an advocate and just like a big proponent of treatment accountability and holding these programs and the individuals that are running them to a higher standard. And in Los Angeles alone, like there are 1,700 treatment programs in Southern California. 1,700 different treatment programs in Southern California, and they and those are just residential outpatient programs. That's not including like individual therapy offices and things like that. So it has turned into quite I think it's a $30 billion industry at the moment, and it also accounts for over 30% of all healthcare insurance fraud. So this tiny little sector of healthcare accounts for over 30% of all health insurance fraud. So the argument that me and a lot of my colleagues have been making to legislature and policymakers and insurance companies is like, look, it's in everybody's best interest to do a better job of regulating this, because every year our insurance premiums go up. And that's because every year there's, I think between 10 to $15 billion of insurance fraud that circles through this tiny industry every year. So yeah, that's kind of my story and what I've been up to change things and just try and do a little bit of good in this world. Totally. No, it's really, it's kind of interesting. Each state has its own unique laws and regulations around mental health and behavioral health. And some states are very stringent in regulating it. And then other states, which usually means that they just don't have any, it tends to be like in pretty conservative states. I hate using this type of analogy because there are some conservative locations that have excellent treatment and treatment options there. But for the most part, it's sort of the way it seems to work from what I've seen, both from an experiential standpoint and what the data shows, is that everybody wants to help people that have behavioral health issues, even insurance companies. I mean, when the 2007, when Obamacare came out, everybody loves to hate insurance companies, but insurance companies did kind of bend over backwards to accommodate the behavioral health community when the Affordable Care Act said that they mandated care. They said, look, you guys have to start covering this. The insurance companies were extremely generous with behavioral health organizations in terms of funding them and reimbursement structures and stuff. But what happened is a lot of these organizations, they got really greedy. So they started scamming. And there's been documentaries about like urine testing where they were charging millions of dollars for like urine screenings and stuff like that. And then and a lot of it was fraudulent. And then they were just, the billing schemes on these things are ridiculous. So what happens then is insurance companies kind of have their actuaries go over things every year or so and they look at what's happening and they're like, oh my God, we're getting fleeced left, right, and center. Like, what is going on here? So the insurance companies react in par. They just kind of blanket will cut rates across the board. So unfortunately, the system that we have, we tend to use very blunt instruments to like do it. So they'll just kick everybody off of insurance policies. Typically in more conservative states where there are smaller populations, it tends to be less population density, it's more rural than urban. They'll get a hold of this stuff, and a lot of the fraud happens on the Medicare side of things. There's tons of fraud on the private insurance side, but there's a lot of fraud on the Medicare side. So, the more conservative places will get a drift of this, and they'll just use a blunt instrument. So they'll make it next to impossible to open any kind of treatment program in their jurisdiction. And then there are other states like California, which, despite being very liberal and having a fairly prolific regulatory body, they're actually pretty lax on regulation for behavioral health and treatment programs. Florida is another program like that. Like the big treatment hubs in America, which is also where the corruption is mostly focused at, is in Florida and California. Must be something about the weather. There are very big treatment communities in Texas as well, and then like the Northeast, mostly because insurance payers will pay more. But the regulatory body is just like a hodgepodge of these things, and none of which really kind of match up to anybody. So what ends up happening is if you get caught doing a bunch of corrupt stuff and you get fined or even do jail time in Texas, for instance, you can just close up shop in Texas, move to California, open a treatment center, and nobody's the wiser. It's like, oh, yep, there you go. And then they start doing the same thing again. And if you kind of pay attention to the trends, you start to see like, oh, this person was there, they were doing this, and this is that. And I speak regularly to federal authorities and law enforcement bodies and regulators. I've even had insurance companies that have been like, look, dude, you have to stop calling us, because I'll call and just report like, hey, I know this person's doing fraud or this is whatever. And the insurance company, there's one in particular, I won't name the name, but they were like, look, dude, you have to stop calling us because we know this is going on, but like there are also like at least 150 other cases of the exact same thing going on. So they're just flooded because there's so much volume that the insurance companies can't keep up with it, and then the state regulators can't keep up with it. And I've even spoken to like federal authorities like the FBI and stuff like that, and they were like, look, we're on it as much as we can, but there's so much of it, and they tend to go for big numbers. So they want like if the FBI or a federal body is going to get involved, they want the prosecutors want a nice dollar figure attached to it because it makes more sense for them to put the resources towards it. But meanwhile, there are all these other kind of smaller players that are just fleecing the system left, right, and center. And the sad thing is the people that suffer, it's not insurance companies and it's not these scummy treatment centers, it's the patients. Families end up getting, I was in treatment with a kid, and this is not unusual. His family had spent, by the time he went to the treatment center that we were all in, his family had spent over $2 million on treatment for him. And I could list off at least 20 or 30 people that I know their family spent that much, if not double that, on rehabs. And they just go and go and go. And the treatment centers are happy to take the money. Who wouldn't? I mean, like, why not? But they're not held to the same standards and results as regular medical communities could be. So the argument that I tend to make and make ad nauseum is that, from a regulatory standpoint, it makes sense because it will lower healthcare costs ultimately, and for individuals, it's just the financial cost of it. It's unsustainable to people. So I think there needs to be some real structural and paradigm shifts in the way that we deliver and provide care to particularly kids, particularly children. I think they're the ones that need it the most. Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, in families, I mean, I always when I I try to like coach and counsel families that are looking for treatment, and mostly what I never place people in treatment. What I tell is I tell families this is what you need to look for when you are looking for a treatment center in your kid, and it's all kind of the same stuff. Is the person that you're talking to a salesperson? Ask them that. You can ask them that. If it's an admissions person, be like, hey, do you have any clinical training or experience whatsoever? And if they say no, then they're a salesperson. And their job is to try and sell you and pitch you on the program. And as a patient and a parent or whoever, you have the right to speak to clinicians. And if they can't give you clinicians to speak to, then you don't need to go to that treatment center. And it's the same. It's like, are the people that are going to be treating my child, not seeing my child and doing whatever, the people that are going to be actually treating my child, are they licensed clinicians? If so, let me see their license. When were they licensed? What is their specialization in? Because treatment and therapy is just like any other side of medicine. People specialize, and you should specialize. They're kind of general practitioners, and then there are people that specialize in like sexual trauma or men's sexual trauma or LGBTQ sexual trauma, because it presents itself in a different way, and there are kind of unique characteristics to each one of those. So you get a lot of these kind of laymen that are like, oh, well, we can treat anything. And it's like, okay, if you can treat anything, then that means you can't treat anything. So if you can treat everything, then that means you can't treat anything. So like you should just kind of move on. And programs should be specialized. So there are residential treatment programs that specialize in like schizophrenia, for instance, or borderline personality disorder, or there are programs that specialize with just females that have experienced sexual trauma, or women that are pregnant, for instance, because that is a whole challenge in itself. So really it's kind of asking and drilling into these programs on like, what do you specialize in, and then make them prove it. Because a lot of these guys, they'll say anything to get you in. They'll go, oh yeah, we can do this or we can do that or whatever. They'll say just about anything to kind of get you in the door. But the problem, and most parents, when you're desperate and you've got a child that's a terrorist, and sometimes they are. I mean, there are some really like troubled and kids that you're like, parents are like, Jesus Christ, we just need to get this guy out of our house for a little while so we can regroup. And I totally understand that. But you're only going to make things that much worse if you send your child off somewhere that's not able to handle them. In fact, it's going to do more damage, and they're probably going to come home more angry, more messed up, and more activated than they did when they left. So I try and just slow parents down and slow individuals down when they're thinking about treatment, because when you're desperate, and you want to get help, and you want to get help then. So I tell families to like slow it down a little bit and work on that. You can get my book on Amazon. It's for sale on Amazon. Again, it's called Selling Sanity: The Troubled Teen Industry, the Insane Profits, and the Kids Who Pay the Price. And it was written by myself. Absolutely, yeah. And if families ever have questions or concerns, or they're thinking about placing their kid in treatment and they don't know what to do or anything like that, they can always reach out to me via my email. It's corey.gentry@gentryconsulting.com. And and it's free. I don't charge people for treatment advice. There are lots of folks that'll try and help. They'll be like, "Oh, we're here to help," and then they're like, "Oh yeah, it's $500 or $5,000 or whatever." I don't do any of that. If families are reaching out for help and they need assistance, we help them and we point them in the right direction, and it doesn't cost anything. Yeah. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this, and have a lovely rest of the day. All right, talk soon. Bye.